Hi there. A couple of years ago, I was in Don Juan, an oasis town along the ancient Silk Road. Columns of camels shuffled by carrying tourists against a backdrop of huge sand dunes on the one side and shallow ponds on the other, the restored temple looking resplendent in the background. I can imagine how welcome that sight must have been for an ancient Silk Road caravan emerging from the desert. The thought then struck me that I actually knew nothing else about Silk Road caravans other than the fact they contained lots of camels. I didn't, but a young man called Owen Lattimore did. Back in 1926, at the age of 26, young Owen took part of his journey back to India in a camel caravan crossing Mongolia. Today, no doubt, he would have recorded his journey with a bundle of selfies on the internet, but fortunately for us, in 1926, he wrote down his observations and transformed them into a 350-page book. And he was the source for answering all my questions.
How do you join a caravan?
Well, you have to travel by train or some other way to the departure point. And then, because Owen wanted to take back some belonging, he also needed to rent some caravans. So the second step was to find a broker. Now, the broker acts as a guarantor of any agreement and the arbiter if anything goes wrong. So Owen would pay some rental money to the caravan owner, and the caravan owner would guarantee to get Owen and his belongings to his destination without any extra charge. Neither party will trust local courts to settle disputes because they're too open to bribery. Now, poor Owen actually needed the broker because the Chinese army soon afterwards sequestered all the camels they found in the city. And although he'd already paid for the camel owner had spent the money, and without camels he couldn't get any credit. So the solution was that poor Owen had to pay twice, but he had the right to sell the camels at the other end of his journey.
So, how much did it cost to rent a camel?
Well, when Owen made his first agreement in late spring 1926, he paid 50 thaler each. Now, 8 thaler is equivalent to £1 sterling or $5. By the time of his second transaction, the end of the summer, the price had almost halved. The reason was that there was an incipient civil war in the area, and that had reduced the flow of cargo for the camels to carry. The owners were pretty desperate for work.
Is there a departure schedule for caravans?
Well, not in the sense of fixed timetables, but a long journey usually takes a lot out of the camels, and they need time to feed up and recover, usually a couple of months. And June and July are generally the best months because the grasses then are very good, and it's also the time that camels shed their hair, and that camel wool is very valuable. In addition, camels that work throughout the summer cannot grow a good coat, and so they'll be less useful in the winter. So you add these factors together, and the usual departure times are in February, arriving at the end destination then in time for feeding, or in August, just having been able to rest and feed up during the summer.
Are there any fixed routes for caravans?
Well, no, not in the sense of there being a series of well-trodden tracks, but there are routes with watering and grazing areas that are known to the camel leaders. Obviously, some routes are better than others. In Owen's case, his first choice would have been along the so-called Great Mongolian Road, which passed through more densely inhabited areas, relatively speaking. This offered more opportunities for trade and allowed the caravan to leave flour and feed with a household for the return journey. I think this needs a bit of explanation. The further west one travelled, the more the price of flour would rise. So leaving a store of it for the return journey would save buying expensive flour at the other end. Owen, however, was forced to take the winding road, a less travelled route with more dry stages towards the end. This was because there was a civil war breaking out at the time. Government troops were sequestering all the camels they came across. In addition to the usual bandits, there were bands of deserters from both sides. Even when they were traveling much further south, they camped one night near a caravan that had been robbed of all its 200 camels, and they were left abandoned with their luggage in the middle of a desert.
So, what sort of trade takes place along the route?
Well, when the caravan rests, local Mongols will come to the camp, and there they'll be given a bowl or two of flour, symbolic of food and hospitality. And after that, the trade can begin. The men in the caravan will be looking for wool and camel hair, lambskins, and possibly milk, cheese, and mutton. The Mongols will be looking for thread, cloth, brick tea, pipes and tobacco, trinkets, and of course, more flour. As I said, the further west you go, the higher the price of flour becomes until it actually exceeds its own weight in meat. Towards the end of the journey, caravan men will hope to exchange the wool and the skins for gold dust and for opium to take back with them.
How big is a caravan, and how much can it carry?
Well, in Mongolia, the caravans tended to have between 200 and 300 camels. If that was much larger, it would place too much strain on the water and grazing available at the end of each day's stage. Owen's book doesn't actually say how much every individual camel can carry, but about 200, 250 kilograms would be an average load. Don't forget that conditions are far from perfect. The camels have to be loaded and unloaded at the end of each stage. Not all of the camels, by the way, carry merchandise. About 30% of the entire load of the caravan is for feed for the camels. Camels can go without water. They don't really like to, but they can't go without food. The camels are also needed for tents, food, and cooking equipment for all of the men. Guests like Owen and his servant also ride on a camel that carries their tents, bedding, personal equipment. They, by the way, pay a fee towards the overheads of the caravan and are expected to buy a sheep or two for a feast on the route. Then there are the pullers that guide the individual camels, and they're usually allowed half a camel load for personal trading en route. So it wouldn't be too far-fetched to say that not much more than half of the caravan will be carrying cargo intended for sale at the end destination.
How far and how fast do they travel?
Well, Owen's caravan travelled from Hohhot in northwest China to Zirtai Sir in Xinjiang on the winding road. He estimated the journey to have been about 2,550 kilometers, and it took him 137 days. However, there were days when the caravan didn't travel. It stayed around because the grazing was good or the weather was bad, or in Owen's case, spent 9 days in detention. So if we only count the days travelling, the caravan averaged about 27 kilometers a day.
How is a caravan organised?
Well, I think we have to look at it as a sort of hierarchy. Theoretically, at the top are the camel owners. After all, without them, there is no caravan. Now, he undertakes to deliver the cargo at the end destination regardless of cost, but there's no time span agreed in the contract. He pays for the food for his men and his share in the overhead costs of the caravan, but for the rest, he has nothing to do with the further running of the caravan itself. Next in line, then, is a caravan leader. Now, he has the overall responsibility for all the decisions en route. In addition, he owns the tents, the water butt, and all the other gear, as well as the camels carrying them. And he's usually paid 150 thaler for the return trip, plus 20 thaler for each man living in the communal tents. Below him is the caravan master. Now, he is in charge of the caravan when it's on the move, and he has to control the rest of the crew. And he's paid about 80 or 90 thaler for the round trip, but good ones can command double or treble that amount. Below him are the Xin Sheng. Now, these have qualified or clerks or accountants of the caravan, which means that they basically have to be literate and tend to come there from a sort of higher class. They're also known, or they also have to know, the watering and grazing spots en route. They travel mounted on horses, and one of them will go ahead with the cooks and try and find the next campsite. When the caravan is at rest, they are the ones with absolute control. They earn between 6 and 8 thaler a month, and they may own 1 or 2 camels themselves. Next in line is the cook and his assistant. They will ride at the front of the caravan, and the assistant cook will help to find water for the campsite. And finally, there are the pullers. Now, each puller is responsible for a lean of 18 camels, and 2 leans make up a par. Now, the 2 pullers then will cooperate in settling the camels at night in 2 parallel rows, with baggage on the either side to protect them from the sand and the winds. And then they'll take turns in guarding them. They'll earn 2 thala a month, plus whatever they can get from trade en route. On the journey west, which is the direction that Owen is taking, they'll walk all the way. On the way back, when the road loads are less full, less heavy, they can ride a camel, and they're allowed a full camel load to trade. Then we shouldn't forget the camels themselves. Now, they are led with a rope threaded through a hole bored in their nose. This usually happens when they're about 3 years old. The males are gelded 1 or 2 years later. You don't take a bull camel on a caravan because they'll cause utter chaos trying to establish and rule the harem. Now, after they're about 4 or 5, they'll be taken on trips with lighter loads until they reach full strength at the age of 7. For the next 5 years, then, they're at their peak, but at the age of 12, their teeth will have been worn down. They're less able to eat the grasses available. But if they feed from a Lowe's bag, they'll last till at least the age of 30. And then last but not least, there are the caravan dogs. These help to guard the caravan at night, and especially the back of the tents.
What do the people on the caravan eat?
Well, Owen ate the same food as the rest of the men throughout the journey. In the morning, the cook will make some brick tea, and the men will drink it and mix some of it with some cereal. The main meal for the entire caravan is around midday. The most important ingredient is flour. This is rolled into dough balls and boiled with a little fried meat. Then it's served with a sauce made of fatty sheep fat, salty fermented sauce, spices, and more salt. And the rest of the day, the men will eat millet bread and porridge. Interestingly, at the start of the journey, the owner will have bought some sheep. What's interesting is he'll keep 70% of the skins, and the Si Sheng will get the rest. But when the sheep are bought during the journey itself, the head cook will keep 70% of the skins for sale, and his assistants will get the rest.
What happens when a camel is injured?
Well, it can happen, and if it does, it'll be left to die. Men will make light of it, but they won't make any attempt to kill the animal, nor when it's dead will they eat it for any meat. It belongs to the desert. Now, on 2 occasions, Owen shoots the creature to put it out of his misery, but he's met with some serious head shaking when he returns to the tent. The caravan people are generally very worried about death, especially if someone dies en route. They're afraid that the ghost of the departed will seize their spirit in order to avoid being abandoned in the desert, having to listen forevermore to the sound of departing camels.
One last question. Do camels spit at you?
Oh, yeah, they most certainly do. They're especially bad-tempered at the start of a journey when they're not used to carrying the weights. And the spit is highly unpleasant, worse than any smell in China, says Owen. Not even the ooze-covered stone sewer streets of Ningpo approach it in the reek of pestilence and corruption. Yuck. Don't worry, though. You just let it dry and it'll brush off by itself.
So what happened to Owen Lattimore?
Well, he finished his journey in January 1927, was reunited with his young wife, and completes the journey to India. He already was fluent in Chinese, and he returned to learn Mongolian. He became a lecturer on China and East Asia in America and later in the United Kingdom, and taught until his retirement in 1970. His son, David, who was also a lecturer in Chinese studies in Leeds, arranged for the book to be republished in 1975. If you can't find a copy in the library, there are still copies available second-hand on the internet. And if you're looking for an engaging and absorbing adventure book, Try reading The Desert Road to Turkestan. It will repay the effort. Well, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. The music was composed by Janet Zado, director of the Florence Youth Orchestra. The next slide will give the details of where you can find us on the internet, and I hope to meet you online sometime soon. Goodbye.